right, this is probably going to be the most controversial video lesson that we've ever done. We're going to look at that passage in Thomas Aquinas where he's talking about Aristotle's idea that woman is a misbegotten male. So, all of you female members of the New St. Thomas Institute, get ready. You're going to want to listen to this one. And we're also going to talk about Eve and the creation of Eve and the significance of the rib and her name. And I want to thank right off the bat Vanessa. She's a member of the New St. Thomas Institute. And when she joined several months ago, she said, "Oh, please, please, please talk about Thomas Aquinas' understanding of women. Is Thomas Aquinas anti-woman? I'd love a class on that." So this class is for you, Vanessa. Okay, so the creation of woman, the creation of Eve. Her name, Eve, actually in Hebrew is Chava, and it means living one, the origin of life, the source of life. It's related to the Hebrew verb to live, and she is the mother of all the living. She is the great, 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 great grandmother of all of us. All of us descend from her. And as a side note, there was a medieval mystic named Saint Matilda, and in one of her visions, the angel Gabriel, she learned, said to Mary, Ave. Now we know the Ave Maria, the Hail Mary, the Hail full of grace. And in this vision, the angel said, or it was revealed to her that the angel really said, Have. Now I remember reading that, I'm like, that's just a bunch of bull. There's no way that a angel in the first century appearing to a Jewish girl, a Jewish virgin, Mary, would speak Latin to her. Well, later on, as I was looking through some of these passages, I realized that there is a Hebrew greeting, Have, and it means hail, as in long live the Queen, or we say Viva Cristo Rey, live Jesus Christ. It's a way of saying hail when you wish life on another, or a long life, like long live the King. And so it would be perfectly suitable for the angel to salute Mary, who would become the mother of God, with this word Have. And the reason that's important is because all throughout the Middle Ages, in the Eastern and in the Western Church, they noticed that this Ave, this Ave Maria, if you turn it around in the Latin, it becomes Eva, the Latin name for Eve. So Mary, by being the mother of God, immaculately conceived, turns around, flips the script of Eve's disobedience. So Eve leads all of us into original sin. Mary, by her obedience in bringing forth her son Jesus Christ, brings all of us to life. And so Mary is the reversal of Eve. And so it's appropriate that the hail that she receives the moment of right before Christ becomes incarnate in Mary actually is Eve's name, Have. Now, the other question that people bring up about the creation of Eve is the rib. What's the story on this rib? Well, Thomas Aquinas answers this in the Summa Theologiae. It's in the first part, question 92, article 3. And he asks whether it's fitting that the woman should be brought forth from the side of the man. And Thomas answers in this way, quote, "It was right for the woman to be made from a rib of man. First of all," and he gives two reasons here, first of all, to signify the social union of man and woman. For the woman should neither use authority over man, and so she was not made of his head. Nor was it right for her to be subject to man's contempt as his slave, and so she was not made from his feet. Secondly, for the sacramental signification. For from the side of Christ sleeping on the cross, the sacraments flowed, namely blood and water, on which the church was established," end quote. So Thomas Aquinas breaks it down for two reasons. First of all, woman is meant to be from the heart of man. Woman is the apple of his eye. She comes from his chest. She is literally his bosom buddy, right there at his side. That's where woman belongs in relationship to man. And Thomas Aquinas has this great insight. He says, she wasn't taken from his head because that would make her above him. And she wasn't taken from his feet because that would make her a slave, subject to him. God's intention was that they would be side to side, helpmates, right? Soulmates, right? That was the relationship of the two, and this act signifies that mutual relationship, right? Or as he says here, the social union of man and woman. But there's a mystical reason here as well. And Thomas fast forwards to the cross, and Jesus is on the cross, and he dies on the cross, so he falls asleep. And just as God had cast a sleeping spell on Adam and took from his side this rib and formed the woman his perfect spouse, so when Christ falls asleep on the cross, God from his side brings forth the church. And you remember that scene in the Passion of the Christ where St. Longinus pushes that spear, Christ is already dead, pushes the spear into the side of Jesus, and all that blood and water comes out. In the movie, it actually kind of baptizes the centurion who's standing there. It kind of just comes down upon him. And that mixture of the blood and the water flowing out from the chest of Christ, all the church fathers see in that a representation of Christ as the new Adam. That blood and water flowing out signifies the sacraments, the water of baptism and the blood of the Eucharist, of the new and everlasting covenant. And that is how the church is built. And we read all throughout the scriptures and the Gospels, all the way to the book of Revelation, that the church is the bride of Jesus Christ. We have a nuptial relationship with Jesus. We are married to him in faith. We are one body, one flesh with Christ because he has made us his bosom buddy. He's made us his bride, his intimate spouse. Now, for the controversial part. All right, what's all this about a misbegotten male? Well, Aristotle, in his book on generation, and you can find this on De Generatione 2:3 is the citation. He says, quote, "The female is a misbegotten male." And this idea was, of course, very popular throughout the Middle Ages, that women were seen as somehow inferior to males in their physiology. And we find in Scripture, a woman is seen as the more fragile sex. And of course, in a certain sense, that is true. Women are smaller, they're tinier, they're usually shorter, they usually weigh less, right? So in the anatomy, they are. But what about this idea of a misbegotten male? Are women just sort of deformed or subhuman in comparison to their male counterparts? Well, Thomas Aquinas, as you probably guessed, looks at this question head on, and you can find it at Summa Theologiae, the first part, Prima Pars, question 92, Article 1, his response to objection 2. And I'm going to read the whole thing. It's a little long, but I want us to just dive into exactly what Thomas says. And it goes like this, quote, "As regards the individual nature, woman is defective and misbegotten, for the active force in the male seed tends to the production of a perfect likeness in the masculine sex, while the production of woman comes from the defect in the active force, or from some material indisposition, or even from some external influence, such as that of a south wind, which is moist, as the philosopher Aristotle observes in De Generatione. On the other hand," and this is the key part, "on the other hand, as regards human nature in general, woman is not misbegotten, but is included in nature's intention as directed to the work of generation. Now the general intention of nature depends on God, who is the universal author of nature. Therefore, in producing nature, God formed not only the male, but also the female," end quote. Okay, so what do we make of all that? Well, Thomas looks at the question from 2 points of view, all right? And we'll start with the second one. The second one is from the point of view of God as it relates to the human species that God has created. And here Thomas says, absolutely not. The woman is not a misbegotten male from this divine point of view, which is really the most important one. It's God's point of view. It's God's intention in creating human beings. Now, let's back up to the first point of view. Here, Thomas is talking about anatomy, and we need to just pause here and talk about the idea of potency and act in Thomas Aquinas. So Thomas Aquinas used these 2 categories of potency and act, and so he would see, if you take an acorn, the acorn has the potency to be actualized, as a matter of fact, to actually be a giant oak tree, right? So the acorn has the potency to become an oak tree. A squirrel embryo is moving along in its potency to become an actually full-grown, functioning squirrel. So everything in nature is moving from this potency to act. And in fact, humans, when you have an embryo, a sperm and an egg come together, right? There's potency there, and it grows and develops. It actualizes into a full-grown human person. Okay, so from that point of view, as we look at and this is kind of using an archaic understanding of procreation, from that point of view, Aristotle, who's before Christ, and Thomas Aquinas, who's in the late Middle Ages, are looking at the way nature works. And so they look at human males, and they see that males have things like nipples, right, which don't function at all, right? And they don't know too much about what goes on in the womb. But here's the way Thomas sees it. You have an embryo, and it develops to a baby, which is born, right? So you have that 9-month trajectory right there. Well, it seems, according to him, and of course he doesn't have access to pictures of babies in the womb, it seems that as there's a development going there from something that's very basic to a baby that's born that's crying, that it goes through a process, the potency becomes actualized, right? And so for him, it starts off as more feminine, and then somewhere along the line, something comes along that makes it male, right? So this would be why males have nipples, even though they don't work, right? And actually, modern science does seem to confirm the way Thomas is teaching. I know this is also a little bit controversial, but if you look at the reproductive organs, and by the way, your sex, your gender is determined at conception. When the sperm and egg hit, you're either XY or XX, right? You're either male or female. But anatomically, as that begins to actualize, as we see, for example, the reproductive organs are on the inside, and over time, if it's a male, if there's XY, they become external and come out. So there's a little bit more there. So this is the way Thomas, especially Aristotle, is thinking about it, is potency and act. And so he sees that a male is just a little bit more actualized, a little bit more happens to him to reach his final goal. And of course, Aristotle is also going to look at men are stronger. In the Olympics, they can run faster and row faster and score higher because of their muscular structure and their physical power. And then also in this development in the womb of being actualized. So that's kind of what's going on there with Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas' understanding of the relationship between a male and a female. And there's one last thing that we need to touch on. It's important, the reason Thomas Aquinas is even spending time on this, it's important because we might be tempted, especially modern man, we might be tempted to say, well, there's human nature, Homo sapiens, but within Homo sapiens, we find two kinds. There's male Homo sapien and female Homo sapien. So we might be tempted to say, well, then there's two subspecies. There's Homo sapiens, and then there's subspecies male Homo sapiens, and then there's female Homo sapiens. So we'd have two new species. And Thomas Aquinas doesn't want to do that because he wants to present the unity that God intended of male and female. It goes back to this rib, this bosom buddies. You don't really see that so much in nature. It doesn't seem that, a squirrel, male and female are paired up and being life mates like you see with humans, right? He wants the human nature, the Homo sapiens, to be integrated, one nature. There's not male human nature and female human nature. There's just human nature with two varieties. And so he wants to see in that potency and act, he wants them to be on the same line of development. He doesn't want two different lines, right? He wants to make sure that we're dealing with one nature, Homo sapiens. Well, I don't think that these answers would completely satisfy all the feminists in the world, but I think it does give you insight into how Thomas Aquinas thinks about this, and it also gives you, I think, a richer understanding of how the Jewish and the Christian tradition understand the origins of man and woman, that there is this synergy, there is a bosom buddy reality between Adam and Eve. And from God's point of view, as Thomas Aquinas says, that they are one nature, and from God's point of view, there is no misbegotten maleness and female. God intended for there to be male and female for the sake of procreation from the very beginning, and that's why he said the first commandment ever recorded in the Bible is be fruitful and multiply. Thanks for watching. God bless.